Amid a sea of people draped in expensive suits and glittering prestige, she walked in, small, quiet, and almost invisible. But sometimes it's the ones nobody notices who make the whole world fall silent. At the Grand Arcadia Convention Center, where crystal chandeliers poured dazzling light over rows of crimson velvet chairs like cascading waterfalls, the opening night of the Global Mathematics and Technology Conference was about to begin. This was a gathering for the greatest minds, tech billionaires, Fields medal-winning mathematicians, and legendary professors from MIT, Stanford, and Oxford. The air was thick with ambition and pride. Tailored suits, sharp as knives, hand-embroidered evening gowns, diamond-studded watches gleaming under the spotlights. They spoke of quantum encryption, superintelligent AI, and revolutionary scientific breakthroughs. And then, quietly, almost entirely unnoticed, a woman in a faded gray cardigan slipped through the grand doors. No glittering name tag, no entourage, just a worn canvas bag and a battered notebook clutched tightly to her chest, as if it was the only thing anchoring her existence in a world that had never made space for her. Sophia Reed, logistics technician, a name utterly unknown in a sea of towering achievements. Near the aisle, two young students in Armani suits exchanged mocking glances. "Wonder where the janitor's closet is. Probably lost," the other one sneered. Sophia heard every word, but she didn't turn around. She simply drifted by, seeking out a shadowed seat behind a marble column, a place where the light didn't reach, where the applause and admiring nods had never once been meant for her. On stage, Professor Alexander Harrington, CEO of Harrington Quantum Industries and one of the most celebrated minds in academia, stepped up to the podium. The golden microphone glittered in his hand like a scepter. Harrington's gaze swept across the hall, assessing, categorizing, selecting. And then, for the briefest beat, his eyes paused on Sophia. His lips twitched, not into a smile, into something closer to dismissal, quick and sharp as a snap of fingers in the dark. She had seen that look all her life, had lived in the shadow of it. But this time it would not end the same way, because in this hall ablaze with light and power, no one could have foreseen that the woman they couldn't even be bothered to notice was about to rewrite the story of the evening and shake the proudest thrones to their foundations. It would all begin with a single, silent hand raised in the crowd. Sophia sat curled up in the darkest corner of the auditorium, her palms damp with sweat as she clutched the battered notebook against her chest, as if holding her entire world. She knew she didn't belong here, at least not in their eyes. But if there was any place on earth where she ever truly felt alive, it was among numbers, among equations, among the subtle rhythms of mathematics that she had loved since she was a skinny little girl sitting by the window of a crumbling apartment, tirelessly teaching herself from worn-out library books. Back then, in that tiny room with cracks running across the ceiling, Sophia had dreamed of standing in lecture halls, discussing grand ideas, conquering equations no one else had ever solved. But real life was no simple formula. The day she found out she was pregnant, before she could even finish her sophomore year of college, that dream had to step aside for reality. Utility bills, baby formula, endless night shifts, jobs that never paid enough but always demanded strong hands and an even stronger heart. Sophia spent long years walking the gleaming corridors of places like this, scrubbing dust from floors where the polished shoes of professors and billionaires tread without notice. While they conversed in lofty language, Sophia, both yearning for and understanding every word with a depth few could imagine, remained unseen. And at night, when the crystal lights dimmed and the hall fell silent, she would huddle in her tiny room once again, facing complex problems, wrestling with them alone, solving them alone, lifting her head in silent victory where no applause ever came. No one knew that beneath the faded technician's uniform, beneath the calloused hands worn by labor, lay a mind sharp enough to detect the most intricate patterns, to find shortcuts through mathematical labyrinths where even Nobel laureates lost their way. No one cared. In their eyes, Sophia was just another cleaner, the silent shadow that glided across the hall after every grand event, the one who took down the banners, wiped down the chairs, swept away the remnants of brilliance. And perhaps Sophia had grown accustomed to that invisibility, swallowing her dreams whole whenever she passed by the great conferences, only daring to steal glances at the presentations from afar, never once believing that she would one day stand under these lights, among the finest minds in the world. Never once have I imagined that the same hand that gripped a mop every day could one day rise and write something that would leave them all speechless. Yet tonight, amid the snickering whispers, the condescending glances, the suffocating arrogance pressing in from all sides, a very small fire began to stir within Sophia. Not because she wanted to prove anything to them, but because for the first time after so many years of endurance, she realized, if she didn't believe she deserved to step forward, no one else ever would. And so, when Harrington's voice rang out in challenge, when the whole auditorium turned expectantly toward her, eager for a spectacle, for a joke, Sophia tightened her grip on the notebook, drew a deep breath, and in that moment, among thousands of cold, glittering lights, one thought echoed in her mind. It was time either to rise or to accept being forgotten forever. The microphone crackled softly as Professor Alexander Harrington stepped further into the center of the stage, his sharply tailored navy suit seeming to absorb all the light under the crystal dome. His voice rang out, cold, steady, carrying the unmistakable authority of a man accustomed to a lifetime of command. "If you have anything to add to the theory just presented," Harrington said, his tone even, almost masking a smirk, "please come forward and enlighten us all." A ripple of laughter spread across the hall like an oil slick. Several phones were raised discreetly, ready to capture the moment when an outsider would humiliate herself before the elite. Sophia sat frozen in her seat, her face burning hot, every instinct screaming at her to bow her head, to retreat, to disappear before she became a permanent joke. But then, her eyes fell on the notebook resting on her lap. The pages filled with equations, the long silent nights, the small dreams that had never truly died. From deep within, a voice rose up, fragile, yet resolute. If not now, then never. Her hand tightened around the notebook. Her legs, trembling, pushed her to stand in a motion that felt almost beyond her own understanding. The entire auditorium seemed to shift with her movement, every gaze fixed on her, no longer just curious, but expectant, waiting for a bitter stumble. As Sophia approached the stage, Harrington stepped aside with a false politeness, a cruel smile flickering on his lips, the smile of a predator cornering its prey. "We are very tolerant of all perspectives," he said, drawing out the words, "even those from any department within the organization." Laughter burst out, louder and sharper this time. Sophia could feel their stares ripping through the thin armor she wore around herself. She took a deep breath, another step forward, and reached out to take the piece of white chalk from Harrington's hand, a tiny fragment that, at that moment, felt heavier than 1,000 eyes bearing down on her. The whiteboard loomed before her like a sheer, towering wall. Sophia stood there, under the harsh glare of dozens of spotlights, her back pinned to the board by invisible forces of judgment. Each second stretched into eternity. Behind her, a deliberate whisper rang out. "Here it is, tonight's comedy act." Sophia closed her eyes for a brief moment. The laughter, the whispers, the shuffling footsteps, they all faded away. In that instant, there was only her and the dancing numbers in her mind. Numbers that pulled her away from this hall full of prejudice. Numbers that carried her back to the quiet nights of her tiny rented room, where mathematics and a silent, unshakable belief in herself had never been stolen away. Opening her eyes, Sophia lifted her hand and wrote the first line, slowly, steadily. Thin white characters bloomed against the dark green surface of the board. Each stroke is a declaration. She was here. She understood everything they thought she never could. And even if this world had never made room for her, mathematics always had. Every breath in the auditorium seemed to falter as Sophia began to write, the faint squeak of chalk slicing through the air almost in sync with the heartbeat of the sea of onlookers. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. The intricate mathematical symbols emerged one after another, steady, precise, as if they had always been waiting in her mind for this exact moment to be called forth. At first, the faint ripples of laughter still lingered in the corners of the hall. But gradually, one by one, each laugh faded away. Mocking glances shifted into astonishment, and then into stunned disbelief. Sophia wasn't just solving each step of the complex problem Harrington had posed. She was doing something no one had anticipated. Instead of adhering rigidly to traditional methods, she introduced a subtle transformation, condensing 3 tedious lines of reasoning into a single, seamless maneuver, saving time, clarifying the heart of the problem in a way that even the professors seated in the front rows could hardly believe. In the front row, Dr. Elizabeth Chan from MIT, who had been silently observing until now, instinctively leaned forward, her eyes wide with pure amazement. Her hand, holding a pen over her notes, trembled slightly from excitement. This girl, the one everyone had dismissed, was sketching lines of mathematics with the elegance and precision of a dancer performing to a silent symphony only the keenest minds could hear. A hushed voice rose from the faculty section. "She's using hyperdimensional variable reduction." Another whisper followed. "Impossible. That's a strategy you only see in cutting-edge quantum research." On the stage, Professor Harrington stood motionless, clutching his stack of notes as if it were the only thing keeping him from collapsing right there, in front of the entire conference. The cold certainty in his gaze had been stripped away, leaving behind only stunned disbelief and a flicker of unmistakable panic. Sophia kept writing. Each stroke of chalk was like a blade slicing through the walls of arrogance that had been built around her. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't need their permission, didn't seek their acceptance. She spoke only to the numbers, to the theorems, and to the quiet faith she had nurtured alone in the shadows for so many years. When the final line appeared on the board, Sophia set the chalk down on the edge of the tray, turned around, and faced the entire auditorium. Her eyes held no defiance, no arrogance, only the deep, unshakable calm of someone who knew she belonged here, no matter how many times the world tried to deny it. In that moment, the Grand Arcadia Hall, once filled with sneering laughter and cold, dazzling lights, fell into absolute silence. No cough, no whisper, only the stark, undeniable truth was shining brightly across the number Sophia had left on the board. And somewhere, in that profound silence, history had begun to shift. Silence hung over Grand Arcadia like a heavy shroud, stretching so long it seemed to become a deafening echo inside the minds of everyone present. Harrington stood frozen before the board, his gaze darkening. He could not deny the brilliance that had just unfolded before his eyes. But pride, deeply rooted in his blood, would not allow him to bow so easily. His hand clenched tightly. Then, with a swift, almost violent motion, he turned and ripped a page from his folder, a sheet filled with complex symbols, and hurled it onto the board. "Then solve this," Harrington said coldly, his voice no longer calm but laced with bitterness. "A problem from our internal research project, never published, never included in any academic journal. I believe it will require more than simple tricks." The entire hall trembled. Students whispered nervously. Professors exchanged tense glances. They all knew the cryptographic problems from Harrington Quantum Industries were so complex that even top-level PhDs often faltered. This wasn't just a mathematical challenge. It was a warning. A blade Harrington had thrown to defend the crumbling fortress of his pride. Sophia stared at the board, her palms still dusted with cold chalk. Before her lay a labyrinth of tangled, metaphysical symbols, markings no textbook or dissertation had ever contained. For a fleeting moment, doubt washed over her. Had she gone too far? Could an unknown logistics worker like her really dare to tread this path? From the far side of the hall, a whisper cut through the air, deliberate, cruel. "Look, the joke's finally ending." The laughter was soft, but it felt like cold steel scraping against her skin. Sophia drew a deep breath and closed her eyes. She was no longer in Grand Arcadia, no longer surrounded by contemptuous eyes and skepticism. She was back in the tiny rented room from long ago, where she first touched mathematical theorems with a raw heart and an unbreakable love, where she learned that mathematics belonged to no class, no title, only to those stubborn enough to seek the truth hidden beneath the veils. Opening her eyes, Sophia picked up the piece of chalk once more. Her hands no longer trembled. The auditorium lights cast a shadow of her small but steady figure onto the whiteboard. Slowly, she began to dismantle the problem, following the pure intuition that had carried her through her loneliest nights. Line by line, she peeled back the complex layers, tracing subtle patterns, searching for a hidden rhythm. 1 minute passed, then 2. The hall remained deathly still. Sophia paused for a moment, tilting her head slightly, as if listening to a melody only she could hear. Then, with unexpected certainty, she changed her approach, abandoning the traditional path of variational analysis taught in textbooks. Instead, she wove together dimensional analysis with algorithmic minimalism, a bold move unprecedented in any publicly recorded method. In the front row, Dr. Chan instinctively rose halfway from her seat, her eyes wide with disbelief, her hand clutching her notepad so tightly her knuckles whitened. She's using an entirely new method," she whispered, her voice a mix of awe and reverence. Sophia didn't notice she had become the center of the universe in that room. She only knew she was exactly where she belonged, inside the world of numbers, of pure laws, where neither courtesy nor reputation mattered, only truth. One by one, the white lines appeared on the board, simplifying what had seemed impossibly complex. Harrington's eyes darkened. His arm hung limply by his side. The arrogance that had once cloaked him was gone, leaving only raw, naked shock. And in that moment, beneath the glittering chandeliers, among the rows of crimson velvet seats, Sophia Reed, the woman who had once been mocked, overlooked, pushed to the margins of the world. She was quietly writing the greatest victory of her life. When Sophia placed the final comma on the board, no sound followed. No applause, no coughing, only a heavy, suffocating silence, so dense it felt as though even the air in Grand Arcadia had frozen solid. She stood there, quiet, small, before the whiteboard covered in gleaming symbols that shimmered like stars scattered across a midnight sky. Behind her, an entire sea of people sat motionless. Hundreds of minds that once believed themselves superior could now do nothing but stare up, following the strokes they had just witnessed. Professor Harrington couldn't utter a single word. His trembling hands hung uselessly at his sides. His eyes locked onto the board as if desperately searching for an error, a flaw, a reason to deny what was right in front of him. But there was none. Every transformation, every simplification, every generation step, perfect, not just mathematically flawless, but imbued with a purity, a refinement that transcended the rigid academic molds Harrington and those like him had so long clung to. In the front row, Dr. Elizabeth Chan from MIT had already risen to her feet. Her eyes were shining with an open, unhidden reverence. She walked slowly toward the stage. No one tried to stop her. It was as if the entire hall had silently agreed to clear a path, as if her movement carried the will of the room itself. When Dr. Chan reached Sophia, she didn't speak immediately. Instead, she turned back toward the board, studying it one more time. Then, faced the crowd, her voice slicing through the crystalline stillness, each word carving itself into the sparkling walls around them. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Chan said, her voice firm and resonant, "what you have just witnessed is not merely a solution. It is a leap in quantum mathematical thinking, a breakthrough that could open doors we have never even dared to. Oh, imagine." A wave of whispers erupted across the auditorium. veteran professors adjusting their glasses. Young students are exchanging bewildered glances. One of them whispered, "Who is she? Why have we never heard of her before?" Dr. Chan turned to look at Sophia again, and in her gaze, there was not just recognition, but genuine admiration. "What is your name?" she asked softly, yet with a weight that filled the room. Sophia swallowed hard. Her voice, though small, rang out clear and unwavering. "Sophia Reed, technical support staff at Grand Arcadia." A shockwave rippled across the hall. Phones slipped from hands onto chairs without anyone bothering to pick them up. Those who had once smirked could now do nothing but gape in stunned silence. On stage, Harrington's face twisted with strain. He tried to speak, but all he could manage was a weak, broken mutter. "Impossible. She couldn't have done this alone." Dr. Chan turned her gaze to Harrington. Her eyes are as sharp as a blade. "Perhaps the real issue," she said coldly, "is not about who is allowed to do it, but that we never bothered to look closely enough." A smattering of applause broke out at the back of the hall, hesitant at first, then gathering force, swelling like a tidal wave toward the stage. The hall exploded in thunderous applause, shattering the heavy silence that had once smothered Sophia. She stood there, still empty-handed, still wrapped in her old cardigan, but she was no longer small. In that moment, Sophia Reed, the woman once mocked, dismissed, and shoved into the shadows, stepped boldly into the blinding light of recognition, without a prestigious degree, without a glittering name tag, only with the unstoppable force of her mind and spirit. And for the first time after years spent living in the invisible margins, she was no longer the one cleaning away the footprints of others. She was the one leaving the very first footprints, on a path the world would soon be forced to follow. The next morning, Grand Arcadia seemed like a different world. The once cold, distant corridors now buzzed with whispers of admiration, with eyes that followed Sophia wherever she quietly passed. She was no longer the faint shadow lingering at the edge of the light. She had become a silent earthquake, powerful enough to shake the very foundations of academic pride. Crowds gathered at the entrances to the auditorium. Reporters from science journals, representatives from prestigious research institutes, tech investors, all asking the same question. Who is Sophia Reed? Inside a closed-door meeting of the university board, Professor Harrington sat across from the council members, his face pale. His hand was clutching a pen as if it were the last shred of power he could hold on to. The dean's voice rang out, cold and cutting. "Alexander, do you realize that your personal arrogance almost cost us the discovery of a true genius?" Harrington wanted to object, wanted to offer an excuse, but faced with the heavy stares and the undeniable record of achievement Sophia had etched in just a few hours, he could do nothing but remain silent. The meeting ended with a unanimous decision. Harrington would be stripped of his academic leadership, a devastating fall, unlike anything he had ever experienced in his once illustrious career. Meanwhile, when Sophia stepped out of Grand Arcadia that afternoon, the wind caught her simple brown hair. And this time, there were no mocking glances, no sneers, only respectful greetings, offers from top universities, and research opportunities she had once only dared to dream of from behind closed doors. Dr. Elizabeth Chan personally handed Sophia a thick envelope. Inside, an honorary invitation to MIT, a full scholarship for doctoral research, and the freedom to pursue any topic of her choosing. "We need minds like yours." Dr. Chan said, her voice was deep and earnest. "Not just for what you know, but for how you see what others fear to even imagine." Sophia held the envelope in her hand. Her heart was pounding with excitement. But deep down, she knew the greatest gift she had received today wasn't the scholarship. It wasn't the recognition. It was the freedom to walk her own path, no longer shackled by prejudice or the cold judgments of others. That night, in her small room, Sophia sat by the open window. The city lights outside glittered like 1,000 distant stars. Her battered notebook lay open before her. Its pages were worn with fingerprints soaked with years of silent struggle and dreams. She smiled, not the smile of triumph, but the smile of someone who had finally been allowed to live as herself, in a world that had once tried to crush that dream. And somewhere far away in the night, Grand Arcadia's lights still blazed. But within those lights, there was no longer room for hollow arrogance. Only a silent, lasting lesson remained. That genius wears no uniform, needs no brand. Genius belongs only to those who dare to believe, and to those brave enough to see what others refuse to notice. 6 months later, in a sun-drenched lecture hall at MIT, Sophia Reed stood before the whiteboard, her familiar gray cardigan draped over her shoulders. But this time, she no longer hid in the shadows. Her eyes shone with quiet confidence as she wrote complex equations with steady strokes of chalk. Before her sat rows of young students, listening, not out of curiosity, not out of pity, but out of respect. Respect for a woman who had risen above every prejudice to reach the heights of knowledge through her own strength. Sophia spoke to them of how the limits in mathematics were no different from the limits people imposed on each other, and how sometimes it was only the courage to cross those invisible boundaries that opened up new horizons never seen before. Every word she spoke carried the weight of experience, not just the mind of a mathematician, but the soul of someone who had once been seen through, as if she didn't exist. At an international conference on quantum science, Sophia was invited to present before thousands of leading scholars and tech entrepreneurs from around the world. She stood there, amidst the blinding lights of the stage, introducing her new encryption method based on dimensional minimalism, a technique she had pioneered herself. This time, the applause wasn't hesitant and wasn't polite. It exploded like a storm, roaring and endless. Even those who once ruled over the highest podiums of power stood up, offering her a respect no title could ever command. From the audience, a young student raised her hand, a petite girl, her eyes sparkling like Sophia's once had years ago. "Ms. Reed," she asked, "how do you believe in yourself when the whole world seems to turn its back on you?" Sophia paused for a beat. Her gaze softened. She smiled, a smile forged from years of hardship and undying faith. And then she answered, "Because the world only turns its back on you, until the day you make them turn around." The auditorium sank into a reverent silence. In that moment, Sophia was no longer just a scientist. She had become a symbol for the buried dreams, for the misjudged talents, for the unyielding spirits who refused to bow to injustice. Meanwhile, in a quieter room far away, Alexander Harrington sat alone, watching Sophia's presentation replay on his screen. No longer arrogant, no longer able to hide the bitter awe creeping across his face, bathed in the soft light of a setting sun through his office window. He gave a slow, silent nod, a belated admission that true genius had never resided in a luxurious coat, but in the enduring spirit and undying light of those the world had once dismissed. That night, as Sophia stepped out of the grand hall, she looked up at the vast, open night sky. The stars above glittered back at her, as if answering each of her steps. There were no more limits to cage the dreams in her heart. Because today, she hadn't just stepped into the light. She had carved a new path with her own hands, a path for all those once forgotten to follow. A reminder that sometimes the ones who light up the world are precisely those it tried hardest not to see. There are some geniuses who do not emerge from prestigious lecture halls, nor wear the cloaks of glory. They grow quietly in the shadows, nurturing their dreams through sleepless nights and unseen efforts. They're judged, overlooked, dismissed, simply because of their simple appearances or humble beginnings. But the truth is, light never needs permission to shine, and a person's worth has never depended on the eyes that judge them. Sophia Reed's story isn't just the story of one woman rising above prejudice. It's a reminder to all of us that sometimes the world will only see you once you dare to step out of the silence. Once you dare to believe in your own worth, even when no one else does. Once you persevere through every dismissive glance without letting it extinguish the light inside you. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever felt pushed aside simply for being different, remember the moment when Sophia picked up that piece of chalk under hundreds of mocking stares. And remember, as long as you don't give up on yourself, the world will, sooner or later, have no choice but to step aside and make way for you. Leave a comment and share your story of overcoming judgment. Or simply write, "I believe in my own worth," so we can spread that belief and strength even further. And if Sophia's journey touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel to never miss the extraordinary journeys of seemingly ordinary people. People who carry enough light inside them to change the world. In a world where the spotlights often favor glittering names and tailored suits, there are those who pass through quietly, unwelcomed, unrecognized, and unexpected. Yet sometimes, it is the forgotten ones who change everything. Sophia Reed's journey is not just a story of intellect. It is a silent anthem of perseverance, of unwavering faith in one's own worth. Throughout her story, we witnessed a woman mocked, belittled, but through quiet, steadfast persistence, she made even the most arrogant halls of power rise to their feet in applause. The greatest lesson from this story is simple yet profound. True worth isn't stitched into a gown or printed on a diploma. True worth is the unstoppable light burning within. The message Toch Story hopes to leave you with today is clear. You don't need anyone's approval to move forward. Believe in yourself. Nurture your light day by day, and sooner or later, the world will no longer be able to ignore the brilliance you carry within. My personal belief is this: every person carries their own unique light. Never let temporary scorn or judgment make you forget that, because those who dare to quietly move forward, they're the ones who end up changing the world in silence. If this story touched your heart, please support Toch Story by liking, commenting with your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to Toch Story, so together we can spread more extraordinary journeys and remind ourselves every day that the greatest miracles often come from the most humble souls.